Peter Bauer wakes up and gets out of bed. A short time later, he sees his wife, Carol, crying in bed. He tells her that it was just a dream and she should go back to sleep. After that, he enters a room and closes a window there. Then he leaves his home and rides on a train. The next scene has him sitting in an office and talking to some man. The man tells Peter that he's a musician. Then Peter asks him who the current president is and what is the current year. The man tells him it's Ronald Reagan in 1987. After that, the man asks him if they met before and Peter confirms that they did. We see that Peter is a psychotherapist. Later, he speaks to a man named Duncan at another office. Peter tells him that he misses analysis and his patients. Then Duncan asks him how Carol went through some event that matters to Peter and her. And Peter answers that she was devastated. Afterward, Duncan asks if Peter can say a certain girl's name. And after some hesitation, Peter says Evie while crying. Then he has a flashback of being with his daughter. Another image then comes of him running to her as she lies near the road. As they walk, Duncan asks him what he looked at that took his sight away from Evie. And Peter can't remember. The following scene shows a montage of patients speaking to Peter in his office. Then it stops on a certain lady. She expresses to him that she does not know what she is doing here sometime. Peter then asks her if she has thoughts of ending herself and she tells him that she can't do it. As they sit there, Peter gets abruptly interrupted by a passing train and we see he is alone in his room now. Then he comes out and sees a little girl sitting there. He asks her who she is here to see and she points at him. Then she enters his office and gives him a document with her name on it, Elizabeth Valentine. After that, he slides her a piece of paper with a pencil, and soon after the pencil starts moving. When another train passes near the window, the girl gets scared. Peter closes the blinds and after that, he notices that Elizabeth has run away. But he notices that she wrote some numbers before she did. Peter then comes home and starts looking through his daughter's box of items. Carol stands at the doorway and asks him about it. He tells her that it will be Evie's anniversary next week, and his wife replies that anniversaries are something to be celebrated. In the next scene, Peter arrives at his office's waiting room. He sees Elizabeth's doll lying there and the door to his office open. He peeks into the room and sees Elizabeth standing near the window. Then he enters it and asks her how she got in, but she just hums and stares through the window. As he comes near her, Elizabeth's sounds become stranger and she points at something through the window. Then she starts choking and falls. After that, Peter carries her to the couch and then goes to get something from his desk. But when he comes back to her, she is gone. That prompts him to search for her in the street, but she is not there either. Later, Peter occupies Duncan's room. Duncan tells him that he hears nothing but a train and Peter talking to himself on his recorder. He then tells him that he could have imagined all this. When Peter asks why he would do that, Duncan tells him to consider Elizabeth's initials. After that, Peter says Evie, which sounds exactly like Evie. But then Peter questions the existence of the doll, and Duncan states that it could be Evie's. What follows is Peter noticing a painting there. He says that he has dreams about it. Then he says he can't see the bird trapper hiding in the window, and that's what disturbs him in the dream. Afterward, Duncan asks him whom he doesn't want to see in that window. On another day, Peter sits in his office and looks at the number Elizabeth wrote. Then his buzzer goes off. He goes to the waiting room but finds no one there. When he turns back to his office, Elizabeth stands there facing him. She faintly whispers that they have her. Peter asks her who they have and then he says his daughter's name. When he approaches the girl, she is no longer there. Then he comes home. He notices a door moving and making a sound until he closes and locks it. After that, he lies in bed with Carol. Then we see him riding on a train. The lady patient from earlier sits opposite him. She tells him that he missed his stop. Then she says she knows why she can't end herself, because she's already lifeless. After saying that, the train goes dark and the lady scares him in a monstrous form. After that, she disappears and Peter gets off the train. As he walks, he sees her again standing lifelessly. At his office, he looks at her death certificate, and then he looks at Elizabeth. He checks his other patients after that and it's revealed they are all dead. Afterward, he realizes that the number Elizabeth wrote is a date. Then a train stops near his window. Peter sees all the dead patients looking at him from that cabin. The next scene has him talking to Duncan about his patients losing their lives on the same date. Then he tells Duncan that he referred his patients to him, to which Duncan replies by asking what that makes him. Peter looks in the mirror and observes that Duncan is not there. He is nowhere. Peter then does some research and realizes he has to go to False Creek. We see him riding on a train for a while until he arrives there. He then comes to a house and rings its doorbell. A man opens the door that is soon revealed to be his father. He invites Peter in and then asks him why he's here, a question that is left unanswered. Later on, his father tells him he was too upset to attend Evie's funeral. He then lets Peter stay in the room that used to be his. In there, he goes to the closet and takes out a box. He empties its contents onto his bed. Then Peter takes out a paper and inspects what is written on it. Afterward, he goes to a bar and meets a man he knew from long ago who he calls Baz. They sit at a table and talk. Shortly after, Peter brings up the year 1987. Then Baz tells him that they promised they wouldn't speak about it. But Peter starts talking about it in an obscure way. Then he asks Baz if he believes in ghosts. That question causes him to lose his calm and he badmouths Peter. Then he tells Peter to stay away from him before he leaves. After that, we see the father, William, go into his son's room and look at that paper. Then Peter walks along some train tracks. Two boys on bikes pass him and speak to each other. They then place their bikes on train tracks and go to observe a car through binoculars. While they watch an indecent activity, they hear a train riding. That prompts them to run for their bicycles. As they run, one of them sees all the patients that have visited Peter in a cabin, and then the train goes off the tracks. Meanwhile, William looks at the newspaper and we see that it states 47 people have lost their lives in the train wreck. The boy then walks near the train and sees many of the lifeless people there. He then gets replaced by Peter standing there, but we know that the boy was his younger self. After that, Evie appears and tells her father to look somewhere. He sees two girls standing on the tracks. A train then rides through them and they are very likely just ghosts. After that vivid reminder of the past, Peter walks elsewhere. He then sees Elizabeth in the distance, and then his other patient, Felix, comes to him as a zombie. Peter falls to the ground and Felix leans over him before disappearing. After that, Peter returns to his father's home and looks at the paper again. When he sleeps, he awakens to the sound of moving swings. At first, he observes it moving by itself, but then he sees Elizabeth swinging on it. After her, it's Evie, and then it swings emptily again. When Peter comes near the window, Elizabeth surprises him and causes him to wake from fear. The scene changes to Baz sitting in his car at a rail crossing, and Peter sits at a police station, confessing the incident he caused in 1987 to a policewoman. He tells her he's doing it now to properly put things to rest. She then tells him that her mother lost her life in the accident, and Peter tells her he's sorry for it. They speak some more and then he leaves. Back at his father's house, he calls Carol and tells her where he is. After the call, he starts burning the newspaper, but it doesn't burn completely. The fire just stops. That leads to Peter hearing a sound in the house. He calls out for his father and then walks along the house until he enters a room. While in there, the door shuts and keeps him inside. Then he hears a very disturbing sound and searches with his flashlight for its source. As he searches, Elizabeth jumps out at him. She quickly disappears, but then Duncan makes his presence there. He tells Peter they are his ghosts, and he's holding on to them. But Peter tells him that he told the truth and therefore let go of them. To that, Duncan questions why are they still here. Then he states that two bicycles derailing a train is not likely, and he asks again what distracted Peter when his daughter lost her life, and what is it that he doesn't want to remember. After that, Peter wakes up in that room. In the next scene, the policewoman, Barbara, looks through many pictures and documents. She looks at a picture of a younger William and Peter near train tracks. Then we see Peter standing at the tracks again. He remembers himself running that night as a boy. Then he walks into a shack and sees a lifeless Baz. This startles him and the police later arrive. Barbara sits in a car with Peter inside. He tells her that he found Baz like that, and then he tells her that both of them were responsible for the train wreck, but he did not want to mention him the first time. To that information, Barbara gives him her card and says to call her later. Peter gets taken home and looks at the newspaper while there. He flips it over and sees the train wreck solved a mystery of a missing child, Elizabeth. Then a policeman brings Barbara some evidence he found near the tracks. Afterward, Peter comes in and tells Barbara he thinks Elizabeth was not on the train, and she asks him how he knows what she looks like. He then opens up to her about his ability to perceive the people from the accident that he believes he may have acquired due to Evie's passing. In response to that, Barbara says he needs help, but Peter starts telling her details about her mother that he cannot know to prove he's not crazy. Barbara then becomes sad and advises him to go home. When Peter goes to sit in his car, he finds the doll there. He then drives out into the woods and speaks Elizabeth's name and tells her to show him something. Instantly after that, a thump on his window occurs, and then he sees Elizabeth in front of him, gesturing that he come to her. Meanwhile, Barbara looks at the evidence that was handed to her. She looks at the paper and sees that it matches the evidence, which is a school badge. After that, we see Peter running in Elizabeth's direction. He then finds her standing near the train tracks in the shack before she disappears. Later, Barbara comes to William. He lets her in and they talk about the train wreck. She tells him that she's not sure it happened just by two bikes being left there. As they talk, Peter climbs the stairs to the shack. Barbara tells him that the road he took was supposed to be blocked. The only way William could have arrived on the scene using that road was before the accident. Then she shows him the school badge and a picture of Elizabeth. As she does that, Peter perceives what truly happened that night by seeing his father strangle Elizabeth at the shack. She pulls the train lever as he does it to her and the train derails that way. After that, Barbara tells William she thinks Peter saw something that night, and that William knows what he saw. Then we see Peter sitting at the shack, observing how his father carried and planted Elizabeth on the train. With that information thrown at him, William gets up and takes an item to strike Barbara with. He then puts her in the trunk of her car. After all that, Peter arrives at his father. He tells him he remembers everything now. He saw him destroy Elizabeth and place her on the train. Peter then tells his father to confess by presenting his phone to him. William keeps saying that this is nonsense, but Peter calls Barbara anyway. However, he hears the ring coming from his father. When he realizes his father did something to Barbara, William points a gun at him and tells him to get in the garage. When they get in, William wants to handcuff Peter, and Peter asks him how many other girls he ended. That prompts him to come to his son and point his gun to his head. As he does it, they hear Barbara in the trunk. Peter then pushes his father and gets him to the floor, but William soon takes a wrench that lies nearby and strikes Peter with it. In the next scene, William drives along a road while Barbara struggles in the trunk. Then Elizabeth appears in front of the car, causing William to swerve and slightly crash into a pole. Due to that, Peter falls out. The car keeps swerving until it stops on the train tracks. William then hears a train in the distance. He tries to start his car but cannot. The doors get locked too and he perceives Elizabeth's face in the mirror. We see the train coming toward them and William asks his son for help. Then Peter picks up the gun and starts running and firing at the car. Barbara manages to get out and Peter shoots and shatters the back window. Afterward, William tries getting out through the back but sees Elizabeth behind him and she drags him back in. As the train comes dangerously close, Peter saves Barbara as he remembers his daughter. Then the train slams into the car, eliminating William in the process. After that, Peter observes the passing train as ghosts occupy it. And when the train stops in the distance, he sees Elizabeth standing on the road, no longer strange or vengeful. She just looks at him and then turns and walks away. In the final scene, Peter sits at the beach with his daughter Evie. She gets up and kisses him, and then she walks away. Carol then comes to her husband and asks him what he is thinking about. He tells her that he's thinking about kids.